Hi, my name is David Carmichael. I am the director of the Pennsylvania State Archives, and I'm really excited to welcome you here today to share with you some of the exciting treasures that we keep in the State Archives and explain a little bit about what we do. At its basic level, the State Archives identifies and preserves any document that the state government has to keep forever. And that's a lot of documents over hundreds of years, 250 million documents in the State Archives alone. And I will also say we run the State Record Center, which is where we keep the records that will eventually be destroyed, the records the state agencies have to keep. So between the big warehouse that is the State Record Center and the State Archives, we care for 1 billion pieces of paper on behalf of the people of Pennsylvania. Increasingly, we are caring also for digital records as well. But the State Archives cares for anything that we have to keep permanently. So we have William Penn's charter that King Charles II gave to him in 1681 that established Pennsylvania as a colony. We have Pennsylvania's ratification of the United States Constitution that made Pennsylvania a state. We have all of the acts of the General Assembly. Whenever a law is passed, it is sent to the State Archives to be preserved on your behalf forever. So we have records of governors, property records, land records, deeds, building plans, anything that has to be kept for very, very long periods of time. So we're going to show you some of those examples today. I'm going to share with you some of my favorite records, and the staff here are going to show you some of what they do and in order to care for those records. The State Archives was established in 1903, and then in 1945 we became part of the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission, PHMC. And PHMC includes the State Historic Preservation Office, the state historic sites that are spread across the state, and the State Museum. We serve about 3,000 people on site every year. But last year, we served over 6 million people online. So you can also visit us without ever coming to the building by visiting us online. I think if you ask anybody in the archives what their favorite document is, most of them are going to say it is William Penn's charter. It is the document that created Pennsylvania, and so it's document number one. We have the original that King Charles II of England gave to William Penn to establish Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania, as you may know, is not named for William Penn. It is named for William Penn's father, Admiral Penn. And Admiral Penn had loaned the king a lot of money during the Civil Wars in England. And after he died, the king owed that money to William Penn. So Penn asked him to pay him in land in the New World because he wanted to start a country based on religious freedom primarily. He had been persecuted for his religious beliefs. And so the document is a lovely example of a charter from the 17th century. It has been damaged, unfortunately, before it came to the archives, I'm always anxious to say, but it was not in state hands until the early 19th century. In this, the king gives Penn the land, but then William Penn came to Pennsylvania and bought the land again from the Native Americans who lived here. We also have the very first laws that were passed in Pennsylvania. And in 1682, the Great Law was passed. It was the first series of laws passed in Pennsylvania, and the very first act was to guarantee religious liberty and freedom of conscience. And so those are two really great documents that we have here in the archives and are very happy to have. One of my favorite documents also is the Act of Gradual Abolition of Slavery in Pennsylvania from 1780. Pennsylvania was the first state to legislatively abolish slavery, but we have to say right up front, it was not an instant act of emancipation. Very few slaves, unfortunately, were instantly emancipated by this act, but it was a major step toward the emancipation of slaves and the abolition of slavery. And what interests me about this document is it is not just a bureaucratic law that says they will be freed at a certain point, although it does that, but it's also a statement of morality that they feel in doing this. And I wanted to read just a bit of that text, a sentence or two, because it starts out saying that they are so grateful to be freed from the British. And the war is still going on at this point, but they feel that they're winning it and that they're going to get their freedom. And in light of that freedom, that they are getting, they want to free the slaves. And they say, we conceive that it is our duty and we rejoice that it is in our power to extend a portion of that freedom to others, the freedom they have just gotten. And they say also, it is not for us to inquire why in the creation of mankind the inhabitants of the several parts of the earth were distinguished by a difference in feature or complexion. It is sufficient to know that we are all the work of an almighty hand. And so they're really saying on a moral plane that these are people who should be freed and should experience the freedom that God has given them from Great Britain. So it's a wonderful document. We have many records, of course, of prisons and hospitals and other things that the state government is involved in, and they can tend to become very bureaucratic. But one of my favorite documents is the records of the Eastern State Penitentiary in the 1890s, when the statistics were being kept by a man named Sidney Ware. Sidney Ware was convicted of 2 murders. He claimed to have fired in self-defense during a barroom brawl, and he was later pardoned by the governor. He was released from prison and arrested on the steps of the prison and sent back in, and he was pardoned a second time by the governor for the second murder. But while he was in the prison, he kept the statistics for Eastern State Penitentiary. And at the top of every page, he did watercolors that are just gorgeous, where he was illustrating what the page is about. And so when he's talking about the causes of crime, he will illustrate it with a picture of a woman sitting at a table, obviously a loose woman, with a bottle of alcohol, and there are drugs and things in the picture. When he's illustrating the nationalities of all the prisoners, he actually illustrates the flags of all of those countries at the top of the page. And it really takes a very bureaucratic record and turns it really into a work of art. So it's a great record. When people think about archives, they tend to think about old records, and they think of us going out and finding 200-year-old records and collecting them. But we collect anything that has to be kept permanently. And if we can get it when it's new, we have a better chance of keeping it alive for hundreds of years. So one of my favorite records, and I use the word favorite sort of advisedly, is a record that does not look like much. It looks like handwritten notes on sheets of tablet paper, and that really is what it is. These are the notes that were kept by the Commissioner of Police, State Police, on 9/11, from the time he heard about the crash of Flight 93 all throughout the day. And so you are basically watching minute by minute as he goes through and sees this crisis unfolding in front of him. And he makes notes, for instance, of an aircraft down, unconfirmed. And then later he comes back in another hand and writes confirmed. And there are many interesting things about this document. One of my favorite lines in this document is where he says in his notes to double the number of police officers at power plants and bridges starting tomorrow. And I always think about that as the next day he would never have written starting tomorrow, because by then he would have realized the full impact of what had happened on 9/11, and no one ever again would suggest that we should send security tomorrow, that it needs to happen today. And so I look at that line, and it's almost like a transitional moment in history that we're capturing as it happened. And so this is a fairly new document, but historically it is extremely valuable, and we preserve it here in the archives.
Hi, my name is Tyler Stump, and I'm an appraisal archivist at the Pennsylvania State Archives. And so what that really entails is I'm responsible for going out across the state and finding historical records and bringing them into the state archives. And so I've traveled around to lots of different places, offices, organizational groups, and where they are, lots of other different things like that. There are billions of records across Pennsylvania, but only a small percent of them are really historical or archival. So my job is to find and identify the stuff that is actually historical and separate that from everything else. So sometimes we get calls from people who think they have historical records, and we'll go and look at them. Other times we have certain records in mind and we're going out and trying to locate where they are. In either way, I'll go out into the field wherever these records are and I'll start appraising them. And so that means looking for historical value, because we like to say just because something's old doesn't necessarily mean it's historically valuable. We see a lot of receipts and old drafts and newspaper clippings that aren't really the types of things that we want to have in the state archives, because they don't really tell the story of Pennsylvania's history like other records would. So we look at things like the condition of the records, the perspective that they have in them, so whose story is it telling and from what angle? Is it related to other things we have in the state archives? Would it be better served at another archives and maybe not the Pennsylvania State Archives if it's from another state or another area like that? So regardless of what that is, we'll go and we'll appraise it, and then we'll figure out if it's an appropriate thing to bring back to the state archives. So once we've figured that out, then I'm responsible for going out in the field, and wherever those records are, we'll try and box them up and we'll label them. Usually records, if you're lucky, they'll be in a storeroom or a back kind of a closet or something. But I think some of the stranger places I've been to have been hospital morgues, prisons, horse barns, and other kind of outbuildings, bathrooms. I mean, you name it, people store records absolutely everywhere. So no matter where they are, we're going to go and get them. We'll clean them up, and then we'll bring them out to the archives. And then we just kind of get them ready for the processing team, whether they're going to be, whether they'll have more preservation that's required, or they'll be digitized, or whatever else. Our job is to bring them into the building, and then we can get them ready for research from there. I think one of my favorite things about being an appraisal archivist is when you visit the archives, all the records are nice and neat, and they're usually in a box, or you'll see them online. But in real life, documents are a lot messier than that. There's a lot of stuff that's not historical, kind of a lot of junk that gets mixed in. Records are moldy, the pages are torn, they're stored in weird places. So I get to see kind of the original raw kind of records of history, I guess you could say. So I get to see what it really looks like before it comes here. It's definitely not as pretty as it looks when you come and visit the archives. One of the more interesting things that we've recently acquired is this 1930s era prison logbook from a prison near Philadelphia called Graterford. In the 30s, actually, one of the more famous inmates in the Pennsylvania prison system was Al Capone. He was arrested in 1929 for carrying a concealed weapon in Philadelphia. Now, when he was going to be released from Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia in 1930, the prison staff were worried that there might be someone who would try to assassinate him when he was released. So what they did is, under cover of night, the night before his release, they actually secretly transferred him in the warden's own personal car over to this other prison named Graterford, which is about 30 miles away. And the very next day, he was actually released kind of secretly, but nobody knew he was there, so he was just released right onto the street the very next day. And so this logbook, it's not very exciting to look at, but the interesting thing is that this book is the only documentation that exists that Al Capone, who was prisoner number C5527, was transferred from Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia to Graterford Prison on March 16th, 1930, and then he was released the very next day, so March 17th, 1930. And so that's the only evidence that we have, because most newspaper reports at the time all mentioned that he was released from Eastern State Penitentiary, which is where he was held for most of his prison term. When we appraise records, we're always looking for records that tell a story from a different angle or a new kind of story that's not really in the historical record already. And a great example of that is this collection of letters that we recently got. We actually were just called out of the blue from somebody who had these in their basement. It's a collection of letters from Harrisburg State Hospital that were written in the 1880s. Now, Harrisburg State Hospital was a mental institution here in Harrisburg that was opened in 1854, and it just closed a few years ago in 2008. And most of these letters are from family members who were writing to doctors and other staff at the hospital and asking things like, when can I visit my mother next? Or I sent a Christmas present to my brother here, and I just wanted to make sure he got it, or things like that. So it's a really interesting kind of perspective on life at a mental institution like Harrisburg, which you don't really see in kind of the official minutes and reports and those sorts of things that are created by the government staff. So these letters are a really exciting record that we got recently that kind of sheds more light on an important topic, and from a group of people who aren't really as well known kind of in the historical record. So we were really lucky to get this call and get these records. When I'm appraising records, another thing that I really look for is what I call the second life of a document. So originally when a record is created, it has a specific use. But then when we get it in the archives now, it can be used for a very different purpose. And a great example of that are these, we call them State Anatomical Board Cadaver Receiving Books. I know that's a long title. But these were originally created when different citizens in Pennsylvania, when they passed away, if their bodies were being donated to science or to medical research. So it records where somebody was when they passed away, the reason for death, what medical school got the body, and then where they were buried later. A lot of the individuals that had their bodies donated to science were really marginalized folks, people from prisons and mental hospitals, homeless people, people who didn't have a lot of family. So a lot of times these sorts of individuals are the ones that a lot of records don't exist for them outside of the state archives. So we've had a lot of family researchers who have come in looking for information on a long-lost aunt or uncle or a grandparent or somebody that they know nothing about, and we're able to find them in these ledgers and then find what their cause of death was, where they were living at the time, and where they were buried, which is sometimes the most important information. We've had a lot of people who were able to find where their family members are buried because they had no idea where it was before that. So kind of the second life of these documents has proved invaluable for a lot of family researchers.
I'm Heather Heckman. I'm the head of collections management here at the State Archives. My section takes over once accessioning has brought the materials in. We organize and look at the materials. We identify what it is. We rehouse it into acid-free archival materials, including folders and boxes. We barcode everything, we label it, and we put it into storage. We also describe it on our finding aid, which is available to you from home or here in our search room. That's the tool you can use to find records. So the archives has a large collection of posters, which we scanned and we've made available through our collaboration with the Pennsylvania State Archives on PA Power Library. And the first collection that we did were our World War II posters, and then we moved on to scan our World War I posters, and then all of our state agency posters, including a large collection for pollution and environmental causes. We are also scanning more than 30,000 postcards that cover every county in the state of Pennsylvania for you to be able to access from home. We have more than 20 of them already scanned, and we'll be continuing to add more every month for the next several years until we complete all of them. We also have a collection of business postcards and Easter postcards and all kinds of holiday postcards, and we'll be putting all of those up for you to use. And one of my favorites is the Heinz Pickle postcard, which is actually a business advertisement. At the archives, in addition to holding state agency records, we also have a large collection of manuscript groups. Manuscript groups can be family papers, a collection like posters or postcards. And right here we have one collection of the Preston family. The Preston family included many members, but we're going to talk just about Mary Preston today. She was an early women's rights person. She also spoke out about abolition, and she really fought for female education. She herself was an early teacher, and she attended conferences and spoke about that topic frequently. And here's another example of a manuscript. This is for the Koch family. We have 3 members here that we're representing on the table. We have William Koch, who traveled extensively through Europe between 1825 and 1826. And his document will show you what encapsulation looks like. It's when we put a fragile document between 2 plastic sleeves so we can protect it from wear and from handling. It's quite a large document. And this helps keep it secure even when we have it in a folder in a drawer. We have his sister, Anna Koch. She's represented with some poetry. And his daughter, Annette Koch, who has a scrapbook here, who was also a poet.
Hello, my name is Aaron McWilliams. I'm a reference archivist here at the Pennsylvania State Archives. I work in the reference department. So if you come here, I would be one of the many that would be here to assist you, either finding your records or suggesting additional records. We also handle the emails and phone calls that come in. So if you send us an email, you're likely to get a hold of me or one of my colleagues. One of the most requested records in our collection is actually an assortment of documents. They relate to the state land records. The state land records are the documents that are associated with the patenting or titling of land in Pennsylvania. We have the full collection here at the archive, so land granted by William Penn or later by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania are stored here. These documents have great legal value, and that's why they're stored permanently here at the archives. They are the basis for your land ownership here in the state of Pennsylvania. And one of the examples that we have is actually one of my ancestors. This is Jane Campbell. She purchased land up in Erie County in the early 1800s. And the document itself provides a lot of information, both for the legal aspect of it, again, because of the state land record, but also it provides history. It tells us exactly how the land was settling, the development of Pennsylvania at the time, and the types of people that were settling in the newer areas. It also speaks to the history of families and genealogy, and that's what makes these records very popular among the genealogists. The document itself for Jane Campbell goes through a great amount of detail, even noting how large her barn was in dimensions. And in the patent itself, it goes into detail about her family, noting her children and grandchildren, and actually noting that she was remarried. Before I found that document, she had been lost to time. No one knew where she was, but she got remarried, changing her last name. This document turned out to be a wealth of information for my family, and there's a lot of documents in our collection, in the land collection, that can be of great value to genealogists and to surveyors and others. One of the largest manuscript group collection here at the Pennsylvania State Archives is Manuscript Group 286, which is the Penn Central collection here. It is by far the largest collection that we have in our manuscripts, and it's one of the more popular ones. The reason why is that we have a large collection of mechanical engineer drawings that are very popular with railroad enthusiasts and even model builders here. So we have frequent customers come in to take a look at our engineer drawings, and one example that we have that's very important to the state is the K4S steam locomotive collection, drawing here at the Pennsylvania State Archives. The K4S is the state steam engine, state locomotive that became official in 1987 when Casey signed it as the official locomotive for Pennsylvania. The K4 was the first scientifically researched and prepared locomotive being done at the Altoona Works. This one was tested repeatedly, more so than the past ones were, and it came into production in 1917, continued in multiple iterations up until about 1928. The drawings themselves are very beautiful, very articulate in scale, and cover everything from the locomotive itself all the way down to bolts. One of the more fascinating collections we have here at the Pennsylvania State Archives is the Indian Deed Collection, or Native American Deed Collection that we have here in Record Group 26, which is the records of the Department of State. These records span from the initial purchases done by Penn all the way into the late 18th century with the final purchase of the Erie Triangle. Displayed here are two examples of some of the earlier Native American deeds that we have here. One is from 1736 and the other one is the walking purchase from 1737. And the images themselves are beautiful. The Native Americans signed with their mark, which is usually some type of pictogram, and these are very clear and evident in both of these examples that we have here. One of the more infamous Indian deeds that we have in our collection is the walking purchase of 1737. This was a deed that was done with the idea that Penns would get land as far as a man could walk in a day and a half, but they didn't really walk it. Actually, 3 people started out and only one finished. They basically ran most of the way, and the Penns actually had the way cleared for them to make it easier and they could get more mileage behind them. There's a lot of things wrong with this deed that caused a lot of controversies later on, but it is housed here in our collection, the original, along with all the other Indian deeds that the state has been party to over the years. Here at the Pennsylvania State Archives, we have a vast collection of military records spanning from the French and Indian War all the way up to Vietnam. And the types of records vary from conflict to conflict. As an example, we have the United States Colored Troop Regiment muster out roll. There was 175 of these regiments, and they were African American regiments, but they also included Asians and Native Americans within them. These documents have a wealth of information on the individuals that served in the units, including places of birth, dates of birth. They also have where they mustered in and where they mustered out. It provides a wealth of information as to where the men of these units were raised and where they originally came from. Also in our collection, we have veterans' compensation applications. These are 20th century documents that are of very, very big value to the Veterans Affairs. That you relied on these often to establish service. The example that we have here is of Richard Winters of the Band of Brothers fame. He has a World War II veterans compensation application, which provides information about him, where he was born, what was his domestic and foreign service, and also beneficiaries on the back side. These and other ones are available online, but you can access them here in person.
I want to thank you for joining us today on this tour of the State Archives, and we would love to welcome you in person at our building. We are open Wednesday through Saturday from 9 to 4, and you can just come in and visit us, or you can visit us online at pastatearchives.org. We would love to welcome you either way, so thank you for joining us.